Hi everybody, welcome to the Flicks the Church Forgot. My name is Peter Laws. Tonight we're going to have a look at the new Arrow video release on Blu Ray of the Complete House collection. When I heard that Arrow were releasing all of the House movies, it was kind of a surprise, because while the first House film made an impact on me when I was younger, I could barely recall even knowing about there being House sequels. I think I was vaguely aware of part 2, particularly because there was a poster that I saw in video shops that struck a chord, but I can't recall seeing the actual film, and for the life of me I couldn't figure out anything about parts 3 and parts 4. Sure enough, when I was watching this set back over the last few days, I realized that I've either blanked these films out, or more likely, I've literally never seen any of the House sequels before. Now, thanks to Arrow Video, I've been able to romp through the whole lot, all 4 of them, in this lovingly produced Blu Ray set. The first House movie is, unsurprisingly, I think the best one, made in 1986. It stars William Catt as the writer Roger Cobb. I always remember that name, Roger Cobb, standing out from the trailer when the guy says, Roger Cobb has come here alone. Anyway, horror fans are going to know the actor William Catt, who plays Roger Cobb, as being the school hunk with the blonde perm, Tommy Ross, who dates Carrie White in Stephen King's Carrie, only to get hit on the head by the pig blood bucket, poor guy. In this, he's playing a Vietnam veteran who's not only trying to deal with the trauma of war, but also the fact that his young son has been abducted by some kind of spectral force in his aunt's haunted house. Now, the house Cobb is staying in now is that very house. What works so well here is how balanced the laughs and the scares are. There are genuinely spooky moments in House, particularly I would say in the first 30-40 minutes or so, which is my favorite part of the film. There are examples, for example, that when the kid disappears in the swimming pool, just the way that happens is really weird and Twilight Zone-y. And the atmospheric spookiness is really helped by the music score by Friday the 13th composer Harry Manfredini. Particularly the main title of House, which I think is a very strong horror movie theme tune. I remember that music really standing out to me when I first heard it. And the house itself looks fantastic. I mean, it's not your typical rundown haunted mansion covered in cobwebs and kind of Addams Family style. It's actually very pretty and light and inviting. But it's off-kilter as well. It's got strange pointed rods sticking up over the windows like bat ears, and I don't know, I just thought it was a cool look for the actual house itself. And I love how the opening titles of the film spend so long letting the camera just kind of glide past the building and check it out. So there's certainly moments of genuine creepiness in House, which makes it all the more impressive that the director, who's called Steve Miner, he manages to simultaneously pull out a series of gonzo fright gags within the same film. Like when Cat has to chop up an obese demon in an evening dress while the Shirelles play on the soundtrack. That kind of all fits together. The writer here is Fred Decker, who would go on to write the brilliant, I think, Night of the Creeps. And the following year, that was Night of the Creeps. Then the year after, The Monster Squad, which is a fan favourite. So you can see how Decker's light-hearted horror approach is kind of seeded in House. Funnily enough, while I was watching House, my 2 young children came into the room, and normally I kind of switch it off if I'm watching something shocking, Cannibal Holocaust or something, switch that off. But I remember I left House on for a little while and let them watch a little bit of it, because this kind of feels at times like a horror movie that works well for adults and for children. Not all of the film, mind you. Some of it might be a bit much for young children. But later, when I was watching the extras, I noticed that a few of the commentators said the exact same thing I'd thought at the time. That House is almost like the perfect movie to introduce your kids into horror, because it's silly and it's funny, but it's also got some genuine scariness to it as well. George Wendt is in this, who played Norm from Cheers. I think is a really good addition to the film. I think he's a very important part of the film, of the cast. I remember seeing the trailer as a kid and I was thinking, wow, that's that guy from Cheers. This makes this horror film legitimate in some ways. It's like a mainstream but quirky, and it put me in the right frame of mind to expect something unusual and funny. I love the way the film has him delivering his lines in a kind of underplayed way just works. It doesn't go all out and over the top. Solitude is always better with somebody else around, he says, and he just pulls it off in a funny way. I think William Catt is good in the film too. I mean, he wears jumpers which have epic V-necks. Epic. But he plays the part very well. It's really well observed. He does appear like a man who's trying to hold it together, but is constantly on the like the edge of going all out crazy. Oh, it's also got Richard Moll in it, who plays Esteban, the devil worshipper in one of my personal favourite horror movies, Evil Speak. He plays a zombie Vietnam soldier. He made such an impact in that, actually, that the in House, that the producers were considering making a spin-off movie with him in it, but that never really happened. The Vietnam aspect of the film is worth remarking about. I'll be honest with you, whenever the film cut to the flashback scenes in Vietnam, I kind of found my interest dropping a little bit. I was personally just more interested in the current day horror of the House rather than the kind of old recollections of war, which is ironic because there's a telling scene early on in House when Cobb, who remember is a writer, he's a horror novel writer, he's doing a book signing and he's writing in the books and everything, and his fans are asking, what's the next book about, and he says, it's about my experiences in Vietnam, and the horror fans kind of like go, oh, right, okay. Now, remember, House came out in 1986. It was the year of Platoon, Rambo First Blood Part 2. The following year, we saw Full Metal Jacket, Hamburger Hill, Good Morning Vietnam as well. There was a time when Vietnam was just everywhere in popular culture, so it's not a surprise to see that a horror movie used it as well. But I just kind of found like House works best when it is bringing the trauma of Vietnam into the modern haunted house scenario, and that's the key to understanding House. What's interesting about it, and I think to an extent House 3, which we'll get to in a second, is that the films are, and they mention this to the extras too, are about like post-traumatic stress syndrome, about people dealing with the psychological effects of trauma. In the world of horror, it seems natural to present that particular syndrome as a haunted house film. Because if you have ever been through something, maybe you've been through something distressing, it can be like your entire life becomes a haunted house for a moment, filled with spectres you'd rather forget. I think it's pretty impressive that a horror comedy that works on both of those levels chooses to put these sorts of deep layers into it. So the first House movie is definitely influenced by other horror films, like it's a cocktail of Evil Dead, The Shining, bit of Elm Street, Poltergeist, but I think it still ends up as a solid, satisfying drink all by itself. Now, whereas the original House balanced the comedy and horror to great aplomb, House 2 jettisons any attempt to really scare. And now we have just a couple of party dudes kind of hanging out with a long dead grandpa from the Old West who's trying to protect some sort of crystal skull or something. Dinosaurs are in it. Cowboys are thrown into the mix in a film that probably works very well as an 80s kids TV show. But as a follow-up to the well-balanced House, it kind of tips too far into the ha-ha, isn't this quirky bracket. Another Cheers actor turns up into this, John Ratzenberger, and whenever he's in it, I feel like the film does elevate a bit when he's on. TV host Bill Maher even turns up as a supporting player, but on the whole, but I'm afraid I just found myself pretty bored by the whole thing. I think that there may be some people out there who saw House 2 as a kid and loved it, and I can totally see why you would. I mean, come on, zombie cowboys are pretty awesome, but maybe it's because I have no nostalgic investment already in the film, which means watching it now, just found it to be the least interesting of the four on offer. It's still worth a look, but it's the least interesting. The second movie tips the franchise so much towards family comedy that the third installment, The Horror Show, goes the complete opposite direction. And so it's fascinating. So we end up getting an uber gory, profanity-filled, brutal story in part 3 when Lance Henriksen is haunted by the spirit of an executed murderer. Yeah, the plot is almost identical to Wes Craven's Shocker, which came out later that same year, in 1989. House 3, it does have a few funny lines in it, but on the whole it takes itself very, very seriously, where we see ladies' legs sticking out of meat grinders and boiled heads cropping up in burning fat while liquidized eyeballs pop open, you're thinking, whoa, what if some family had watched the light-hearted fun of part 2 with their children and thought, cool, let's get out part 3 for more of the same. Instead of comedy, they would expose their kids to a dose of post-traumatic stress disorder that could rival Roger Cobb's. It's pretty dark in places, this film. Lance Henriksen is always good value in films. He's pretty charismatic and fascinating to watch in this. There's this intensity to him, I think, which reminds me of a bit of James Woods, who I also enjoy. Also, the killer in this is played by an actor called Brian James, and I think he adds quite a lot to the film. Yeah, he plays this over the top in a sort of I'm coming back to tear your world apart type thug-like approach, but he does it with a kind of twinkle in his eye, delivers ridiculous lines like when he's getting electrocuted on the electric chair and he's shouting, all that did was give me a hard-on. Like, wow, this film's nuts. In fact, the execution scene, complete with Kane Hodder doing the man on fire stunt, he's the stunt coordinator for all the House movies, I think it's really effective. I've read that James, the actor who plays the killer, he's not, sadly no longer with us, but the actor said that it was one of his favourite roles, if not the favourite role, and I can see he's absolutely having a ball playing this horrendous, horrible pantomime serial killer. The film itself doesn't capture the same sort of magic as the first installment, I'm not going to kid you about that. But if you watch the film as a standalone, which in many ways it was the marketing department that pushed this as a House sequel. If you watch the horror show as a down and dirty, sometimes shocking horror movie, then I think it actually works pretty well. Better than many people might give it credit for. I thought it was a fun, intense little B-movie. I looked up reviews online afterwards, and even though critics seem to despise it, I just was not surprised to see a lot of horror fans saying that they really liked the film. So if you've never seen it, if you've never seen House the horror show, it's almost like a bonus film in the House collection package, so it's worth checking out. Finally, we come to House 4, which came out in 1992. In this, William Catt returns as Roger Cobb, but not for very long. He lasts 10 minutes or so before he's burned to death in a family car crash, but his presence still lingers on, along with a singing pizza and a bizarre midget gangster. In all honesty, House 4 is ridiculous, but I kind of liked it. I kind of like the energy of it. Yeah, it's pretty hokey, with some bizarre camera work at times, and some real logical inconsistencies. For example, there's a commentator called Hanky P on IMDb, and he makes the good point that the daughter in this film is paralysed and is in a wheelchair, but her mum seems to have made zero accommodation for this and makes her daughter live in this old Victorian mansion that has just no lifts, no support. Yeah, we see this daughter in all rooms of the house, implying that her mum has to kind of pick her up and sling her over her back and take her all over the place between scenes. Plus, it's confusing because you're thinking, like, when did Roger Cobb get remarried? Like, what happened to his son from the previous film, and his wife, indeed? When did he have this new daughter, because she's quite old? What's he doing being in a new haunted house, and what happened to the old haunted house? But then, who cares about these kinds of logic points? It's still fun, I think, if you give the film a chance. Actually, even at the end, I think there were a few moments in the finale which I thought, oh, that's clever, that's quite nifty. On the extras, the director is very self-deprecating. He's called Louis Abernathy, and he claims that the only reason he got to direct House 4 was because he wrote Deep Star 6. Remember that film? He wanted to direct that, but Sean Cunningham said, no, but I'll let you direct something else later, and he got House 4. Abernathy's resume is strange. He directed this, he wrote Deep Star 6, but he was also an actor in James Cameron's Titanic. Not because he's an actor as such, but because he met James Cameron on a diving trip once, and he ended up in the movie. He assisted with the special effects on the world's best Ouija board movie, Witchboard. He never directed anything again. But to be honest, if I heard that he had a film out, I'd give it a whirl just to see what he came up with, because House 4 is just so kooky. In conclusion, watching the entire set of House movies is a little bit like watching a waiter trying to balance wine on a silver tray. In the first movie, he's got it just right. In the second, he tips it way too far one way. In the third, he goes way too far in the other direction. And in the fourth, he just about gets the balance right again. But by then, too much time has passed and he looks tired and jaded, and actually you prefer to probably order something else instead. Yet watching this topsy-turvy series trying to reclaim its original mojo is actually quite a fun experience in itself. So if you pick up the House collection, you just might find yourself enjoying the other House movies more if you see them on one hand as separate films, but on the other as just part of an interesting kind of exploration of the original themes of the film that started it. If we were looking for my ranking of the House movies, then at number 4 I'd say House 2, The Second Story, a passable family comedy, but for me I just didn't really get grabbed by it, which I suppose is unusual because a lot of people like the film, but not me. Number 3 is House 4, The Repossession. Yes, it's hokey and bizarre, but I kind of enjoyed the ride. Number 2 is House 3, The Horror Show. You should really watch this one as a complete separate standalone film in many ways, because it's so tonally different than the rest. But as a hardcore little horror movie, I would say it's actually worth a go. And number 1 is House, the first and the best, which just gets that tricky balance between comedy and horror just right. The Arrow set is great, by the way. It's got a bunch of interesting extras on the disc. The tentpole ones being documentaries that interview all the major players of the films. There's plenty of time spent on the special effects and the makeup too, so if you like that sort of thing, or if you find that stuff interesting, you'll get a lot of material here. Each of the films has 5.1 sound, and the picture quality varies a bit depending on the source elements, meaning that the first 3 are okay, but the 4th movie suffers in the picture quality department, but it's not the end of the world. Well, look, that's it for the Flicks the Church Forgot. I do hope that you might be able to subscribe to my YouTube channel, leave a comment, follow me on Twitter at Rev Peter Laws, or visit peterlaws.co.uk. Or why not pick up my novel Purged, which is currently out in shops now. But until next time, enjoy real life, because it so often does an effective job of balancing comedy and horror. And also don't forget, the Flicks the Church Forgot.